Right, let me come off camera because I've got some amazing broadband issues today. Right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the walkthrough for test scenarios and test cases for theme 2 of SIT NFT. So if we just cycle through. So the agenda today, introduction, obviously we're walking through that now. So theme 2 scenarios, the scope and boundaries, and we'll have a quick look at some of the scenarios and test cases that we've developed so far. Obviously we've got a Q&A to walk through any queries you have around how we're proposing delivery of theme 2. We'll quickly walk through the evidence types, test cases, if we want to have a discussion around how we upload them. But on the whole, we will be following the same path as SIT and qualification in terms of using ADO. And then we'll summarize the presentation and give you some dates for delivery of the next set of documents and the next workshops. Right, so what we're going to cover today, scenario scope, we will show you some various workings we've done to try and cover off our sort of theme 2, test case versus scenarios SIT. We're sat in a weird position within the program in that we want to kind of drive it like a performance test. So the way we're layering or sort of pushing the scenario driven route on top of the test cases, which with test cases effectively just being a step-by-step guide on who we want to do and at what point, similar to how they're being driven in SIT and qualification. Traceability and coverage, outcomes and requirements, we can probably cover off in the final slide when we're talking about evidence and ADO use. Actors, roles and tooling. This part is actually quite important. We're also going to be covering it in even more detail next week in the non-functional testing work group. You will be receiving a list of questions around the potential use of reuse of any tooling that may be required to move messages through the business process end to end. So I can see someone's got their hand up. Is there a question already?
Yeah. Hi, Ian. This is Shraddha from Helix. Sorry, I just wanted to check if we are recording this session, please.
Yes, it's being recorded.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Please go ahead.
Right, so let's move on. Obviously, if you have any queries, put your hand up or use Slido or put something in the chat. I'm not really bothered about which route we use because hopefully there shouldn't be too many apart from maybe the tooling queries. So the theme of the SIT NFT theme 2, while Simon has correctly described it as a point-to-point test, given that we're mainly focused on the interfaces, what we want to see or what we want to actually attempt is a sort of a small low volume replication of a day's processing. So effectively we want to look at how operational choreography and the associated business processes actually work. So given that the main focus for areas under test will be consumption, migration, potentially, and operational choreography on the whole. So we want to effectively drive the choreography processes within the system so we can actually start exercising, albeit at a very low volume, the central services, kind of overnight jobs, batch processing, all of the processing, but with minimal amounts of data, just so we can check the effects of the end-to-end aspect of testing and compare that to the sort of low volume results that have actually been carried out in PIT. So environment details, we'll come back to this in a bit, but where we actually want, where we stated the potential reuse of participant test tools, that's mainly where we don't have a encyclopedic knowledge of every participant system and how they actually work. There probably is some people in the program that have. So obviously to start a business process, say for consumption, we would need to reuse a data services method of generating those IF21s that will come into the system. I think we'll come over this in a bit more detail towards the end of the presentation. So test data, we are opting for the choreography option that has been provided by the data team. While this puts a enormous limitation on the amount of data we have, so roughly 10,000 MPANs across all cohorts, it does enable us to actually test operational choreography processing. So where we targeted areas such as change of agent, disconnections, we obviously know they're probably going to be sort of one-off MPANs to use. So in terms of the actual daily processing we want to replicate, we're going to shrink that down into much smaller windows for processing. So in terms of a appointment booking, sorry, I lost my thread then. In terms of appointment booking, we'd want to see each step being carried out in sequence. So where the supplier sends the appointment request to the registration system responds to that back to the supplier. Then the supplier reprocesses that messages, sends it back to everyone, and ongoing through that business process. So that's where the reuse of tooling, if the processing isn't coming to the way we want to actually test through this. You have a question, Michael?
I do. I mean, what you're describing there is not really the way we do performance testing. I mean, we don't sort of set it up that we can get into a choreographed event where we're waiting for things to come. You know, we're talking about volumes here. What you're describing is a functional test.
Yes, but with slightly more data points than we'll get during SIT, so we can actually take sort of measurements and analysis of some level of meaning, even though they're at low volume.
The thing is, though, in my pit testing, you know, I'll demonstrate the throughput of the IFs and the pubs through the system, but I'm not going to go to that level of choreography, so I'm not going to have that available for SIT.
Yes, which is why we're sending out the questionnaire. I mean, there may be some reuse of scripts if they're needed, if we can supply the required sort of MPANs or test data that you actually need to reference to push them through.
Okay.
Nigel?
Sorry, and yeah, obviously I'm not a performance tester at all. That's my colleague Paul who's on here, but I'm involved with the testing that's ongoing now, and just hearing what you're describing, I would raise a real concern around that, because even in the functional test side, it's very, very slow. If you're reliant on other parties and those parties are not able to turn something around quickly enough, you can take days to actually go between steps. And I don't think that's really what you're looking for. And I know you're looking for choreography and being able to get the metrics, but if you look at what's happening right now in functional, some of the tests are so slow because of parties. You know, you're reliant on a central party, for example, who's managing it across all the parties. They can't handle that volume. So I just raise that as a risk in terms of how you're looking at this. I don't know if you understood that from what's going on or whether that is a known risk, but it's something I would just call out at this point. And it kind of backs up with what Michael's saying. You'll end up going into just a repeat of functional, in my view, if this is what you're asking for.
So yeah, we have a risk open around it, which is why the questionnaire is going to go out to every participant. But it was something that has been stated in the pretty much all of our SIT documentation and the NH program NFT policy document as well.
Yeah, and apologies because I am late into this. This is my first meeting today, but when I heard this, I kind of had to raise that point based on what I'm hearing and seeing right now. So just to keep you aware.
Yeah, so we need to determine the realms of what's physically possible. So that's that. The more information we have on how the systems are being tested and how they actually work is the main driver to whether this is actually feasible or not. All right, so if we move to the next slide. So in terms of the overall scenario design, we want to at least be able to manage to kick off some level of settlements. So we've picked the first run. So we have a 4-day cycle of inbound messages to actually process and drivers from within the choreography processing to actually drive some further processing outside of settlements within the central services systems. So we are mainly looking at a change of supplier. We may or may not have to ditch that in favour of something similar to change of agent, given the fact that there's no CSS available. But I think there are some forms of data fixes that are being used in non-SIT where CSS also isn't available that we might be able to jump on the back of. So we have meter servicing updates, registration systems. So these are the main drivers for the sort of central services processing on top of the settlements runs, market-wide updates and standing data. So any interfaces that are omitted from this will be drawn into Theme3, where we're effectively looking at the error handling. So that would be DIP interfaces going on and off and how the system behaves initially with the error handling, and then how it behaves once the interfaces are switched back on and hopefully the messages are successfully processed. So if we move on, any further questions on what we've gone through so far? Is there anything on the slide?
Ian, just a quick one from me, so I forgot to raise my hand. The scope of this SIT non-functional is the systems in scope are the participant system. We use DIP adapter, so DIP adapter and all the way to DIP, right? That's the whole chain.
Yeah, it's the end-to-end. It's the end-to-end system. I think Simon described it better as it's a point-to-point test between the participant and DIP, but we want to see lots of point-to-point tests being run. So we want to try and cover off as much as possible, as quickly as possible, given the data limitations.
Yeah, so the participant might have multi-point, I think, because, for example, in SSCN world, we are using a DIP adapter. So for us and applications, we'll have first touch point to the DIP adapter, and DIP adapter will another touch point to DIP. So the scope is to end-to-end, right, from DIP adapter, sorry, participant and application to DIP adapter to DIP. But there's a multi-point. It's not end-to-end. It's not like in the two endpoints each other.
Yeah. So it's the endpoint. So participants DIP, and then that message going from DIP to another role or participant.
Yeah. Okay. Multi-party. Good. Thank you.
All right. So I shall just quickly drop off of this presentation and walk us through some of the slides. We're actually going to slides data. So bear with me. So we are following exactly the same. Oh, we have more questions. Hello, Chris.
Hi, sorry. When you say sort of point to point and that it's participant to DIP with multiple people doing the same thing, in the context of change of supply, which is a very long process that involves a lot of DIP and pub messages, you're saying it's not end-to-end, then which interfaces are you testing? Or are you actually performing an end-to-end test, or being asked to I'm struggling because the emphasis on choreography, which would sort of suggest that you want to perform the end-to-end test next to realistic timescales.
Yeah, I can
But
answer
you're
that
also
question.
saying it's point to point.
The actual data and evidence we're looking for will be point to point. The kind of overall drive of the process will be end-to-end driven, but in segments. So if
Right.
it's an automated response, brilliant. That comes through, that's processed, it's moved on another step within the test case.
Yep.
If it needs some processing, that's why we're making the sort of tooling questionnaire, just in case, or if sort of manual intervention or some form of automation on top of what already happens in the system on a day-to-day basis is needed.
Right, and this has been performed in cohorts. So you're talking to, as a supplier, you'd be talking to a real SDS.
Yeah.
And the same cohorts is currently being used in functional?
Exactly the same cohorts.
Right, perfect, thank you.
Can you see this rather large spreadsheet? This is probably where I would have answered your question, Chris. So we have effectively split everything down into business roles or routes, sorry, by interface. This is the driver for the scope for theme 2. So where we have external Elexon central system processing, this is mostly driven by the registration changes that we're planning on pushing through the system during execution. So to hopefully simplify things, we have a set of processing windows defined. Admittedly, we only have the initial driving interface sat here at the moment. So as part of our 4-day cycle, we have -1 from starting is where we amend the processing windows if they're configurable within the systems themselves. So this fits in with, I think there's at least one NFR around changing processing timings. This also would assist the program greatly in the fact that we should have, but not at the moment, have additional requirements or processes around the activities needed post an RPO happening or a system going down. At the moment, we only have NFRs around, say, 0 data loss and a 1-hour turnaround time. So we're aware a lot of participants probably have a 2-hour RPO. So what would the program do with the participants to claw back any backlogging data should an issue occur, or if an issue occurs, given how some of the systems have worked from DCC recently? So we have identified the initial starting point interface. So that's the main driver where we would potentially need tooling. So that's with the data. Hello again, Chris.
So it's just that comment you said about the way things are sort of working with DCC.
No, it's.
Are you alluding to the fact that there have been some problems? Because we're not aware of any problems that have been encountered in SID.
No, there isn't. I know there was a CSS issue a couple of years ago where the messaging wasn't sort of reset properly.
A couple of years ago. Okay, well, yeah, if we go back far enough, I'm sure we'll find problems everywhere. But sorry, I was just challenging why you were particularly focusing on DCC, because as I said, we're not aware of any problems.
Right, Naveen.
Yeah, Ian, that just back to that point you made, 0 data loss. That's the program requirement to DIP, right? It's not to the end participant systems.
No, so it goes both ways. Yeah. If you're a receiver of messages, it's DIP. If you're a generator or producer of a message, that's a requirement you need to meet.
So you're saying the participant system should also be designed to handle 0 data loss or support 0 data loss architecture?
If you're issuing messages into DIP, yeah, but it should mostly be covered by the adapter, I believe, for most participants.
Well, we're taking adapter as a participant system as well in our case, because it's not like a third party for us, because we become a sort of like responsible for running adapter smoothly. So in whatever way you are saying, it's up to the participant to provide that level of NFR, either on adapter or at the end system level.
Yeah.
Because I thought that that requirement was only to the DIP, to a zero data loss.
No, so it's any outbound message from your part of the infrastructure.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, we are consuming and we will be producing messages as well, but through only the won't go straight to DIP, it will be through DIP adapter. But look like we are party to those NFR requirements. Cool. Oh, well, that's good to know. Thank you.
Rajesh?
Ian, one thing I want to check. So this phase 2 non-functional, because it's end-to-end nature, so participant system will be involved with that. So there will be specific requirement non-functional side, like submitting the if messages or pub message in bulk, and same with consuming messages in bulk. So is it the participant system should be ready to support this activity, and everything will be the part of, means whatever the test stuff will be there that need to be supported at that moment by the participant system. Am I right saying that?
Yeah, but when you say bulk, it's a bit of a misnomer, because there's only, I think 10,000 MPANs available for our use, so it barely touches the side.
So in this phase, maximum you are saying it will be 10,000.
That's 10,000 overall. So I think it's roughly 1,000 per cohort.
Oh, 1,000 cohort. So okay, for each cohort perspective, it's like 1,000, maximum 1,000 at a time. Suppose if we can say.
If you were accepting all of those messages, yeah,
Yes.
which is why we shrunk the working day down to a couple of hours rather than 3-4 days for processing.
Okay, so it means, so anyway, we have the PIT phase for non-functional. So there is some specific requirement for the PIT that we need to do before entering into the SIT. And SIT, there will be specific requirement, and that, as you said, maybe 1,000 MPAN per cohort. So it's maybe it need to support up to that level to be ready to process or consume.
Yeah, so I think if I can go back a little, we've we want volume testing to be carried out.
Yeah.
It's your responsibility for sort of any data creation and tooling from that side. In SIT, because of the limitations in SIT B and the data we actually have available that we can use, we're reusing SIT A functional test data set, so everything's linked up. We're not testing anything in bulk. Because of the very small amount of MPANs that we actually have relative to how many these systems are actually going to process, we may or may not try and push the messages through as quickly as possible, but then that kind of defeats the object of the test in terms of monitoring choreography, and it would also be a little bit of an issue as we move on to theme 3, when we'll be switching off the interfaces. So we want to see like a slow build up in the next round of testing, being buffered and then released. Yeah,
that's fine. Thanks.
Was there a second part to the question? Sorry, I lost my train of thought answering the first one.
No, that's fine. It has answered.
Cool. Right, so back to this. So we've tried to define it pretty much along the lines of how operational choreography will work. So initial step would be configuring the processing windows. So we shrink them down. So any messages, for this phase, we would expect the messages to be sent within the processing windows and processed. But given the kind of generic NFR of an hour response time for the processing of most of this, so we've put each section down with its own hour. So day 1 would effectively be consumption. We may or may not decide to run a load shaping, it will effectively not have probably enough data to even put an estimates in. And for the choreography side of thing, these would all be the initial appointment notification requests coming through the system. So as we move into days 2 through to 4, be running the similar scripts in terms of appointment creation for the next day and consumption data coming through. We'd obviously be running the load shaping service at this point because we will have some data in there for service. It won't be a lot. We just want to see the system run and effectively these reports be available to everyone that wants them. We have additionally from days 2 onwards the actual processing of the notifications that we've created from the day before. So be it change of service, change of agent, deactivation, everything along those lines. We'll see how we've set those up in a second. So we have the overnight processing windows for the operational choreography side of things and Elexon windows sat there. We're not entirely sure at the moment how often the Elexon jobs will run, but we know in terms of choreography processing that will be an overnight process. We won't expect these processes to actually take long at all given the low volume of data. So we've put another hour in for that. So if we move to a load plan by scenario, we've recaptured the data and the processing times from previous tab and move these into separate test scenarios and test cases for reference. Where we have the Elexon processing windows, we are in the current process of running through all of the driving business processes and data for those. And we believe we have them in terms of operational choreography, but we still need to actually document them and push that Elexon side of the test cases through, just in case there's any rescheduling or manual intervention or data changes that may be required to actually kick these off when we're actually executing. So we all know which interfaces are which. So following on the format for SIT testing, we are lifting each scenario as a group of business processes. So this example one is consumption. So we have, or we'll be expecting sort of load injection of smart meters from SDS with one case to effectively drive the creation of IF14s once the LSS processing is kicked off, traditional, advanced, effectively all of the interfaces coming in because we're mainly interface focused rather than performance focused. So to follow on from SIT again, we have a test case design based on the SIT end-to-end. So effectively, we were trying to think of a slightly better way of representing this, which we can probably drive through as you guys are reviewing this from next week. So we have producers, which we know, so the SDSE will, in theory, if they have the tooling, generate the IF21s into DIP for us to process through. And following that, we have DIP to suppliers and LDSOs and back into the SDSC. So where we quickly jump back to this slide, where we've uploaded these test cases into SharePoint, ADO, sorry. We'd like any form of the evidence that we actually want to be uploaded into that, be it a report from your monitoring tools or a screen grab or a log. So any level of evidence that the number of messages have been processed and they've met the NFRs in terms of process time and processing response. So you have a question, Nigel?
Yeah, again, this comes from FTIG and the use of not FTIG, sorry, from functional testing in the use of ADO. Have you also considered that you're going to have to anonymize NPANs if you discuss those in ADO, because ADO is considered a GDPR risk?
Yes.
So as long as that's considered.
It has. I think that's something the whole program's had to take into consideration.
Yeah, and also the fact that ADO doesn't notify. I'm just thinking these are things we've found in functional testing that may not be considered right now, but in ADO, it doesn't have the ability to auto notify people as you're going through steps. So people have to build in that time to notify the next participant in the step that something's happened, and that you end up using Teams besides ADO to run the testing. Something else to consider.
Yeah, so where we actually have a need to kick something off, in an ideal world, everything would be automated. So the processing, an inbound message would be responded to automatically, and then the same going through each step. So yeah, it's something we know about and are aware about in terms of what's being delivered as part of SIT and especially non-SIT, where the simulators are going to be involved.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, sorry, it's some lessons learned that we're kind of seeing in functional tests that we weren't aware of as we went in. So I just sort of call it out from what we're seeing now, should others not be aware.
Yeah, so tooling. Yeah, so on the bulk, we only believe this may be required for the initial injection of MHHS IF messages, but where any additional processing of pubs or new IFs going through the business process is required, we would hopefully like to see some level of tooling. So we have a questionnaire that's currently under review that's going to be going out early next week with these test scenarios and cases actually for review, where we want to at least try and dig out the information on what tooling is actually available and to what level we can actually reuse it, if that's possible at all. All right, so if we move on, next steps. So the scenarios and test cases, I've just given you a very brief look at, because there's going to be a lot of reviewing to come through, albeit these are effectively replicated SIT test cases with some minor tweaks just to fit in with the fact that we want to push through more than a single NPAN per test. They will be issued at some point early next week, hopefully. So what's that, Monday the 20th of May, I think, is our date for deadline. We have a next slot theme 3, which will be more of a technical test than any form of sort of choreography or end-to-end processing, on the 30th of May. And we also have the next non-functional testing work group next, with me, I think it's next Wednesday. Yeah, next Wednesday, the 22nd, where we're going to go into a fair bit more detail around the tooling and any issues that may arise out of how everyone's systems deal with messages individually. Are there any more questions? I think that's the last slide.
Hi, Ian. Sorry, yes, it's Paul Singleton here. So just to give us some idea, what sort of volumes are you looking at for each of these processes that you've been talking about?
Yeah, so I think we kind of covered or jumped over that very briefly earlier on. So we're reusing SIT because it's the only feasible way we have data that can be reused across the entire sort of ecosystem. But it takes a long time to create, it takes a long time to load. So that's why I think as an overall test data set for Beam 2, Beam 3, actually, we have 10,000 MPANs, but that's pushed down to about 1,000 for each cohort. So we're not going to break anything when we actually run these tests. The bulk of it's going to be chucked in through consumption data, and then relatively low numbers for the rest of the processing, given that it's probably got a single use, so maybe 50 or 100, unless we can reuse it for each day.
Okay, so of the order of 50 to 100 processes.
Yeah, so say 50 change of agents, 50
Right.
change of services. If that's going to be single use, because we don't have a CSS and we don't really want to change any data each day we're going into the system to do it, we will just put in a specific amount. So whether we want to push that through as fast as possible, which really wouldn't be of any benefit either. So if we can stagger the pushing through of these messages initially, if they actually need to be pushed through any further midway through the actual test, that's where the whole tooling big question comes out.
Great, thank you.
Chris?
Just on the since the focus is on the choreography, so I assume we're running against the MHHS choreography as defined in the relevant design artifact, but we're doing it in an accelerated way.
Yeah, we're shrinking it down basically.
Right, and so the parameters that sort of say how we're shrinking it, are those forming part of the test scenarios and cases that are being released on the 20th?
Yeah, so that's the very first test case.
Right, and that will apply to all of the subsequent test cases?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
And also for theme 3, where we will be tasked with seeing how messages outside of those windows are processed.
It's things like, you were talking about LLS runs on day 1. But, I suppose it's 4 working days after receipt. So
yeah,
we're
that's why
reducing that to 0. Or
that's why we've got a 4-day cycle. So there should be enough information in the system on day 2 for at least estimates to come through the system for that run anyway.
right.
Any further questions? Is there anything from the other routing queries, Annabelle?
No, nothing's come through via Slido or the meeting chat.
Excellent. Yes, we will be issuing these out early next week for review. Please take a look at these, and also with respect to the questionnaire that should be coming out alongside it in terms of any level of tooling that may be required, because that might prove to be an issue if we need to start generating some areas or SAS. But unless there's any other queries, I just may as well close this call now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers, Ian. Thanks.